He stood in the center of New York's most exclusive restaurant, a symbol of power and success, holding a diamond ring that glittered with the fire of 1,000 captured stars. He was about to place it on the finger of his mistress, a public declaration of his new life, his new love. The crowd was captivated, their phones recording the audacious spectacle. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the woman who had just walked in, the wife he had so casually discarded, wasn't just there to witness her humiliation. She was there to collect her property, because she didn't just own the ring, she owned the entire multi-billion-dollar brand that created it. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a queen taking back her kingdom, one carat at a time. The low hum of contented wealth filled the cavernous space of La Lanterne d'Or. Crystal glasses chimed with the sound of celebratory toasts, and the murmur of discreet conversation wove itself into the soft melodies drifting from a grand piano tucked away in a velvet-draped alcove. This was Jonathan Davenport's natural habitat. He thrived in these environments, places where a man's worth could be measured by the cut of his suit, the vintage of his wine, and the beauty of the woman on his arm. Tonight, he was a king surveying his court, and the woman on his arm was Penelope Vance. Penelope was a masterpiece of modern ambition. Her blonde hair was styled into an impossibly sleek cascade that fell over the bare skin of her back, exposed by a shimmering emerald gown that clung to her every curve. She was 28, 2 decades younger than Jonathan, and she looked at him with an intoxicating blend of awe and adoration that he had long ceased to see in his wife's eyes. He sipped his Chateau Margaux, the dark liquid a perfect complement to the smug satisfaction warming his chest. "Are you nervous, darling?" Penelope whispered, her fingers tracing the lapel of his Tom Ford suit. Jonathan chuckled, a deep, confident sound. "Nervous? Penelope, I've orchestrated multi-billion-dollar mergers. This is a pleasure." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "This is for us. A public statement. No more hiding in the shadows. The world needs to see who the real man of the hour is, and who his leading lady will be." Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, widened with a carefully practiced innocence. "Oh, Jonathan, you're too much." But she didn't mean it. She loved that he was too much. His extravagance was her validation. Every expensive gift, every exclusive reservation was another brick in the foundation of the life she was meticulously building for herself, a life far removed from her middle-class upbringing in Ohio. Across town, in a brightly lit studio in the meatpacking district that smelled of metal polish and focused creativity, Catherine Reyes was oblivious to the drama about to unfold. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant knot, and a pair of artisan's goggles were pushed up onto her forehead. Her hands, graceful but strong, moved with a familiar certainty over a wax model of a new earring design. This was her sanctuary, the heart of Reyes Jewels, the company her father, the legendary Hector Reyes, had founded, and she had built into a global empire. Reyes Jewels wasn't just another luxury brand, it was an institution. Each piece told a story, infused with a soul that mass-produced jewelry could never replicate. Catherine was the keeper of that soul, while Jonathan, her husband of 19 years, handled the aggressive business strategies and public relations as CEO. She was the architect, the artist, the very essence of the brand. Her phone buzzed on the workbench, and she glanced at the screen. Samantha Jones, her head of operations and closest friend. She swiped to answer, placing it on speaker. "Burning the midnight oil again, Kat." Sam's voice was warm but laced with its usual no-nonsense tone. "Just refining the Persephone collection. The clasp on the locket isn't right. It feels weak, Catherine replied, her eyes not leaving the delicate piece in her hands. You're the only person on earth who would lose sleep over the tensile strength of a locket clasp, Sam said with a laugh. There was a pause. Hey, speaking of things that aren't right, I was going over the quarterly expense reports for the executive accounts. Catherine sighed, finally setting the model down. Sam, please tell me this isn't another lecture about Jonathan's entertainment budget. I wish it were that simple. It's not the dinners at Oriole or the fleet of town cars. There's a charge here from our own flagship store, a significant one. It was coded as a promotional acquisition, but it was processed through his private executive account. A single item. A knot of unease tightened in Catherine's stomach. She had been feeling it for months, a persistent, low-grade dread she tried to push away. The late nights Jonathan attributed to investor calls, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his clothes, the emotional chasm that had opened between them, vast and silent. She had chosen to believe his excuses, to immerse herself in her work because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. How significant? Catherine asked, her voice quiet. Star of Serenity significant, Sam replied, naming one of their most exclusive high-carat bespoke pieces, a flawless 15-carat blue diamond set in a platinum band intricately woven with smaller, brilliant-cut stones. It was a masterpiece of design and rarity. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She knew that piece intimately. She had overseen its creation from the initial sketch to the final polish. That piece was commissioned for the vault. It's not for sale. Well, apparently it is now. Or it was. Jonathan authorized the transfer himself 3 days ago. The paperwork is all here, signed and sealed, Sam said, the concern in her voice deepening. Cat, what's going on? Catherine sank onto her stool, the scent of metal polish suddenly cloying, the weak clasp, the late nights, the emotional distance, and now this, a secret, extravagant purchase of one of her own creations. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. He told me he had a big charity gala tonight, Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. At La Lanterne d'Or. A heavy silence hung between them. Sam didn't need to say anything more. They both knew. The charity wasn't a cause. It was a woman. The gala wasn't an event. It was a stage. Back at the restaurant, Jonathan signaled the waiter. The moment had arrived. The lights in the dining room dimmed slightly, a prearranged cue. A hush fell over the tables as diners sensed a spectacle was imminent. Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. "Penelope," Jonathan began, his voice resonating with theatrical gravity. "For too long, I have been living a life of obligation, a life in black and white. You brought the color back. You have shown me what true passion, true partnership can be." He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a small velvet box. It was a deep navy blue, the signature color of Rhea's jewels. Penelope gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. This was it, the culmination of all her efforts, the ultimate prize. Jonathan's eyes gleamed with triumph as he opened the box. Nestled inside, the Star of Serenity diamond drank the light of the room and threw it back in a dazzling, fiery explosion of blue and white brilliance. It was more magnificent than she could have ever imagined. With the entire restaurant watching, with dozens of phones held aloft recording his every move, Jonathan Davenport slid off his chair and knelt on one knee before his mistress. "Penelope Vance," he declared, his voice booming in the quiet room, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" 19 years ago, Jonathan Davenport had been different. Or maybe, Catherine often thought, he had been the same man. But she had been a different woman, one who saw him through a filter of youthful optimism and shared dreams. They had met at a gallery opening in Soho. He was a junior investment banker then, sharp and ambitious, with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. She was the quiet, intense daughter of the great Hector Reyes, more comfortable at a jeweler's bench than at a cocktail party. He had been fascinated by her world. He didn't just see the sparkle of the finished gems, he saw the fire, the pressure, the meticulous art that transformed a rough stone into a thing of beauty. He would sit for hours in her father's workshop, asking intelligent questions, his eyes alight with genuine curiosity. He hadn't just courted her. He had courted her craft. He saw the potential in Rhea's jewels long before she did. "Your father is a master artist, Kat," he'd told her one evening, his hand covering hers over a table cluttered with sketches. "But this is more than a workshop. It's a legacy. It's a brand. It could be the biggest name in haute joaillerie, bigger than Cartier, bigger than Van Cleef and Arpels." She had been swept away by his vision, his energy. Her father was a purist, content with his bespoke clientele and his sterling reputation. Jonathan saw a global empire. When they married, he brought his business acumen to her artistic heritage. At first, it was a perfect partnership. After Hector Reyes passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years into their marriage, Catherine was devastated, lost in a sea of grief. Jonathan stepped in, a pillar of strength. He took the reins of the business side, assuming the title of CEO, allowing her to grieve and to focus on what she did best: design. "You are the soul of this company, my love," he had assured her. "Let me be the shield. I'll handle the boring stuff, the supply chains, the marketing budgets, the expansion plans. You just create. Create the beauty only you can." And so she had. Under their dual leadership, Rhea's jewels exploded. They opened flagships in Paris, London, and Tokyo. Their pieces adorned royalty and Hollywood A-listers. Jonathan became a celebrated figure in the business world, lauded for his Midas touch, his aggressive and brilliant strategies that had turned a respected family business into a billion-dollar powerhouse. But slowly, subtly, the narrative began to shift. In interviews, our vision became my strategy. Catherine's design became the product my creative team developed. He was the face of the company, the charismatic rainmaker. She, by her own preference for privacy, became the reclusive genius, the name on the box who was rarely seen. The emotional distance between them grew in direct proportion to the company's stock price. The man who once sat mesmerized in her workshop now barely glanced at her sketches. His late nights, once spent with her poring over designs, were now spent at business dinners she was never invited to. The shared passion that had been the bedrock of their relationship was gone, replaced by a polite, professional courtesy. They were partners in business, but strangers in life. Their sprawling penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, once a warm home filled with laughter and collaborative energy, had become a gilded cage. It was a showroom for their success, impeccably decorated, yet cold and silent. Catherine found her solace not there, but in the controlled, creative chaos of her private studio. Her work was the one thing that was still truly hers, a direct connection to her father and to the woman she used to be. The rhythmic scrape of a file against metal, the precise click of a setting tool. These were the sounds of her real life. She had tried to ignore the warning signs, burying her hurt and loneliness in the intricate details of a new collection. When a friend had mentioned seeing Jonathan laughing intimately with a young blonde at a polo match in the Hamptons, Catherine had dismissed it as a business meeting. When she found a receipt for a lavish dinner for two at a restaurant she'd never been to, she'd accepted his flimsy excuse about entertaining a client. To acknowledge the truth would be to admit that the entire edifice of her life was a lie. It was easier to believe in the illusion than to face the shattering reality. But the purchase of the Star of Serenity was different. It wasn't just an extravagant expense. It was a violation. That diamond was more than just a stone. It was a symbol, a piece of her family's history. Her father had acquired the raw 50-carat diamond years ago, calling it his someday stone. He believed a gem of that magnitude and unique color had to wait for the perfect design, the perfect moment. After he died, the stone sat in the master vault, a silent, blue-flamed tribute to his legacy. 2 years ago, for their anniversary, Catherine had finally felt ready to honor it. She had designed the Star of Serenity, setting herself, a deeply personal project. The intricate platinum weave was meant to represent their two lives intertwining, the smaller brilliant-cut diamonds the highlights of their journey together. It was a testament, she had believed, to a love that, though strained, was enduring. She had shown the designs to Jonathan, and he had been uncharacteristically moved. "It's magnificent, Cat." "Truly," he had said, his voice thick with an emotion she now realized was entirely fraudulent. "Let's keep it safe, for a special occasion. For us." Now, he was taking that symbol of us and using it as a prop in a tawdry public spectacle. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was desecrating her father's memory and perverting her own art. He was using the very soul of her life's work to destroy her. The hurt was a physical thing, a white-hot blade twisting in her gut. But as she sat there in the silence of her studio, the pain began to cool, solidifying into something else. It was no longer the fragile grief of a betrayed wife. It was the cold, hard fury of a queen whose castle was under siege. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked over to a full-length mirror and looked at her reflection. She saw the smudge of graphite on her cheek and the fatigue in her eyes. This was not the image of a victim. This was the creator, the architect, the true owner of the Reyes legacy. Jonathan had made a fatal miscalculation. He had mistaken her quiet nature for weakness. He had forgotten that the same hands that could shape delicate filigree could also crush stone. "Sam," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier tremor, now imbued with an icy resolve. "Get the car. We're going to a gala." "What are you going to do?" Sam asked, a hint of awe in her voice. "He wants to make a public statement," Catherine replied, pulling the goggles from her hair and letting it fall around her shoulders. "I'm going to give him one." La Lanterne d'Or was not merely a restaurant, it was a theatre, and its proprietor, Pierre, was a master of stagecraft. The lighting was an intimate, honeyed gold. The tables were spaced far enough apart for secrets to be whispered, but close enough for grand gestures to be witnessed by all. Tonight, the main performance was at Table 12, center stage. The occasion was the annual Gems of the City fundraiser, a black tie event benefiting youth arts programs, a cause Jonathan Davenport championed with loud, public donations that bought him priceless social capital. It was the perfect backdrop for his personal drama. Penelope felt like she was floating. The champagne, the admiring glances from other tables, the weight of Jonathan's hand on the small of her back. It was all intoxicating. She saw her reflection in the polished surface of a silver wine chiller and smiled. This was the woman she was meant to be. Confident, desired, dripping in luxury. The woman who had won. She knew Jonathan was married. He had painted a bleak picture of a cold, passionless relationship with a woman who was, in his words, married to her work. He had described Catherine as a recluse, a fragile artist who had retreated from the world after her father's death, leaving him to run their empire alone. Penelope felt a flicker of pity for the poor woman, but it was quickly extinguished by her own soaring ambition. Jonathan tapped his glass with a fork, and the gentle chime silenced the room. He rose, a broad, confident smile on his face. The diners, a mix of New York's financial elite and old-money philanthropists, turned their attention to him. He was a popular figure, known for his charm and his company's spectacular success. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a worthy cause. We are here to celebrate art, to nurture the creative spark in the next generation. And in that spirit, I find myself moved to celebrate a more personal work of art." He turned his gaze to Penelope, and her breath hitched. This was more than she had expected. "For a long time," he continued, his voice taking on a confessional tone, "my life was governed by duty, by legacy. I helped build an empire of beautiful things, but my own world felt hollow. And then I met someone who is herself a masterpiece, someone who reminded me that the most precious gems are not the ones we pull from the earth, but the ones we are lucky enough to find in people: passion, vitality, and a love for life." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. This was far more personal than the usual corporate benefactor speech. Across the room, the venerable Mr. Bartholomew, a titan of the luxury goods industry and an old friend of Catherine's father, watched with a deeply furrowed brow, his expression unreadable. Jonathan's hand dipped into his pocket. "And so tonight, as we celebrate new beginnings for the young artists of our city, I want to mark a new beginning for myself." He produced the navy velvet box. A collective gasp went through the room. Penelope felt a dizzying rush of triumph. He was doing it here, in front of everyone. It was a power move, a definitive severing of his past, and a bold claiming of his future with her. He opened the box. The star of serenity ignited under the soft lights. Its blue fire was hypnotic, otherworldly. It was the most beautiful thing Penelope had ever seen. The sheer size and brilliance of it sent another shockwave through the audience. This was not just a ring. It was a statement of unimaginable wealth and intent. This was a queen's ransom. With practiced grace, Jonathan lowered himself to one knee. The flashes of camera phones, previously discreet, now became a strobe-lit frenzy. The moment was being captured, broadcast, immortalized. "Penelope Vance," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with the sincerity of a seasoned performer. "You have shown me what it means to truly live. Will you make me the happiest man in the world? Will you be my wife?" Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, tears of genuine, overwhelming joy. This was her coronation. She opened her mouth to say the single word that would seal her destiny, the word she had been dreaming of for months. "Yes," she began to breathe out, a soft, eager sound. But the word was swallowed by another voice. A voice that was not loud, but carried with such clarity and authority that it sliced through the captivated silence of the room like a shard of diamond. "That's a beautiful piece, Jonathan. I'm glad you appreciate my work." Every head in the restaurant turned towards the grand entrance. Standing there, framed by the ornate archway, was Catherine Reyes. She was not what the room expected. Jonathan's descriptions had painted a picture of a mousy, withdrawn woman, a ghost haunting a workshop. The woman who stood before them was anything but. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress that fell to her ankles. It was unadorned, save for a single, breathtaking piece of jewelry, a necklace of her own design, a cascade of white diamonds and sapphires that coiled around her neck like a celestial serpent. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek chignon, and her face, though pale, was a mask of serene composure. She did not look angry or hysterical. She looked like she owned the room. In truth, she owned the very brand that was at the center of the spectacle. Behind her, a step to her left, stood Samantha Jones. In a sharp pantsuit, with a tablet clutched in one hand and an expression of grim satisfaction on her face, Sam looked less like a guest and more like an executioner's aide. Jonathan froze, still on one knee, the ring held aloft. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a mottled, purplish hue of pure shock. It was as if he was seeing an apparition. This was impossible. Catherine never came to these events. She hated the schmoozing, the flash bulbs, the superficiality of it all. She was supposed to be in her studio, safely out of sight, oblivious. Penelope stared, her mind struggling to process the scene. Who was this woman? Her poise, her elegance, the way the entire room's energy had shifted to orbit around her. It sent a prickle of fear up Penelope's spine. She glanced at Jonathan's horrified face, and a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced her triumphant haze. Catherine's eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, swept the room once, acknowledging the audience, before settling on the tableau at table 12. She began to walk forward, her heels clicking with a soft, rhythmic cadence on the marble floor. It was not the hurried, frantic pace of a woman wronged. It was the deliberate, unhurried stride of a predator approaching its cornered prey. The whispers started, low and urgent. That's Catherine Reyes, Hector Reyes's daughter, Jonathan's wife." The last word hung in the air, charged and damning. Catherine reached the table. She didn't look at Jonathan. Her gaze fell upon the ring glittering in the box, and then lifted to meet Penelope's confused and fearful eyes. Catherine's expression was not one of anger, but of something far more unnerving. A clinical, almost pitiful assessment. "He didn't tell you, did he?" Catherine's voice was calm, conversational, yet it carried an edge of steel. "About who I am, or about that ring." Penelope could only shake her head, her fairy tale moment crumbling into a nightmare. Jonathan scrambled to his feet, his face a mess of confusion and burgeoning rage. "Catherine, what in God's name are you doing here?" he hissed, trying to keep his voice low, to contain the escalating disaster. "You're making a scene. This is a private matter." Catherine finally turned her gaze to him. The look in her eyes was one he had never seen before. The warmth, the tolerance, the quiet forbearance. It was all gone. In its place was a chilling clarity, the dispassionate focus of a master jeweler inspecting a flawed stone. "A private matter?" she repeated, her voice still level, but now laced with a potent irony. "You got down on one knee in a room full of people, with cameras flashing, to propose to your mistress using a ring I designed for our 20th wedding anniversary. You made this public, Jonathan. I'm just here to add a little context." The word mistress landed like a physical blow. Penelope flinched, her face flushing with a deep, painful scarlet. The whispers in the room grew louder, more fevered. Mr. Bartholomew, at his corner table, leaned forward, his expression now one of intense, grim fascination. Sam stepped forward slightly, positioning herself to the side, her phone now in her hand, discreetly recording. Not for social media, but for evidence. Catherine had planned every move. This was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated, strategic demolition. The architect had arrived, and she was about to show everyone the fatal flaws in the foundation of the life her husband had built. Jonathan, regaining a sliver of his bravado, tried to seize control. "Catherine, you're being hysterical. You're overwrought. Let's go home and discuss this." He reached for her arm, a gesture of command disguised as concern. Catherine moved her arm away with a motion so fluid and final it was as if he had touched air. "Don't," she said, the single word sharp enough to make him recoil. "We have nothing to discuss at home. Everything that needs to be said will be said right here." She turned her attention back to Penelope, who looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Catherine's voice softened, but not with sympathy, with the detached tone of a professor explaining a complex but tragic theorem. "That ring," she began, gesturing towards the box Jonathan still clutched in his trembling hand, "is called the Star of Serenity. The central stone is a 15.2 carat, fancy vivid blue diamond, internally flawless. My father acquired the rough stone in Botswana over 30 years ago. He never cut it because he was waiting for the right inspiration." She paused, letting the history of the stone sink in. This was not just a product off a shelf. It was a legacy. "I designed that setting myself. Every detail has a meaning. Do you see the interwoven platinum bands?" She looked at Penelope, forcing the younger woman to meet her gaze. They were meant to represent two separate lives twisting together to become stronger. The 19 smaller diamonds embedded along the band, one for each year of our marriage. The hidden sapphire on the inside of the band is my birthstone. I designed it as an anniversary gift. For my husband. From me. Each sentence was a perfectly aimed blow, dismantling Penelope's fantasy piece by piece. The ring on which she had pinned all her hopes was not a symbol of her future, but an artifact of a marriage she had helped destroy. It was a stolen heirloom. Penelope looked from the ring to Jonathan, her eyes wide with accusation. "You told me you had it commissioned for me," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jonathan sputtered. "I did. Catherine, you're twisting things. This is a malicious lie." "A lie?" Catherine's voice sharpened. "Sam!" Sam stepped forward, holding her tablet. On the screen was a crystal-clear image of Catherine's original, hand-drawn design sketches for the Star of Serenity. They were dated, signed K. Reyes, and watermarked. "The original design schematics, dated 2 years ago," Sam announced crisply, "along with the GIA certification for the stone, which lists the Reyes family trust as the original owner." Catherine continued, her focus now lasered onto Jonathan. "And as for how you commissioned it, let's talk about that. You didn't buy this ring, Jonathan. You stole it." "That's slander," he snarled, his face contorting with rage. "Is it?" Catherine's calm was terrifying. "You used your executive discretionary fund to authorize a promotional transfer of the ring from the master vault to your possession. The transaction, number 7274B1, was processed at 4:15 p.m. 3 days ago. The stated purpose was for a showcase at a potential investor event. You forged the acquisition request, bypassing the standard multi-signature protocol required for any item valued over $1 million. You know the protocol because you wrote it." The level of detail was staggering. This wasn't an emotional outburst, it was an indictment. She was laying out a case for grand larceny in the middle of a 5-star restaurant. "The value of that ring is not what you paid, because you paid nothing. Its appraised insurance value is $28.5 million, or," Catherine stated, her voice resonating in the dead silent room. "You took a corporate asset, a piece of my family's history, and attempted to gift it to your mistress as a personal item. That's not just infidelity, Jonathan. That's embezzlement. That's fraud." Penelope let out a small, choked sob. Her dream had curdled into a sordid, criminal conspiracy. She looked at the diamond, and it no longer looked beautiful. It looked like evidence. It felt heavy, tainted, a millstone that could drag her down with him. Jonathan was cornered. His bluster had evaporated, leaving behind the raw panic of a man whose carefully constructed world was imploding in real time. He looked around the room, at the faces of his peers, his investors, his friends. He saw no support, only shock, disgust, and the cold, unforgiving judgment of his social and financial equals. Mr. Bartholomew was slowly shaking his head, a look of profound disappointment on his aged face. "You," Jonathan stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Catherine. "You will regret this. I built this company while you were hiding in your workshop." A humorless smile touched Catherine's lips. "That is the biggest lie of all," she said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal. "You didn't build anything, Jonathan. You were the auctioneer. I was the artist. You sold the paintings. I bled the paint onto the canvas. You took the credit for my work, for my father's legacy. You thought I was a silent partner you could control. You thought I was just a name. But you forgot something." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "My name is on the building. My name is on the box. And my name is on every single share that gives you the power you so arrogantly flaunt. You are an employee, Jonathan, and your performance review is long overdue." The finality of Catherine's words hung in the air like the silence after a lightning strike. The illusion of Jonathan Davenport, the master of the universe, the charismatic CEO, had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. He was left exposed, a common thief and an adulterer, stripped of his power and prestige in front of the very audience he had sought to impress. The room, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell into a profound, uncomfortable quiet. The only sound was the distant clatter of a dropped fork from the kitchen. No one dared to speak. They were witnesses to a complete and total annihilation, executed with the cold precision of a surgeon. Jonathan's face cycled through a series of emotions: rage, denial, fear, and finally, a pathetic, pleading desperation. "Catherine, please," he whispered, the sound pathetic in the vast silence. "Not here. We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix," Catherine stated flatly. Her gaze was unflinching. "You broke it. And I don't repair broken things, Jonathan. I melt them down and create something new." It was then that Penelope made her move. With trembling hands, she reached up to her ear, unhooking a pair of diamond earrings, a gift from Jonathan last month. She placed them quietly on the table. Then she slipped off a delicate diamond bracelet, a birthday present. It joined the earrings. Her movements were jerky, frantic. She was shedding the gilded skin he had given her, desperate to distance herself from his toxicity, from the impending wreckage. Finally, she looked at the Star of Serenity, still in its box in Jonathan's hand. She wouldn't even touch it. She looked at Jonathan, her face a mask of revulsion and betrayal. "You used me," she said, her voice thick with tears. "You told me she was nobody. You told me this was our future. It was. It is," Jonathan pleaded, turning to her. But his words were hollow. "No," Penelope said, shaking her head as she backed away from the table. "This is your mess. I want no part of it." With a final, mortified glance at Catherine, she turned and fled, weaving through the tables of stunned onlookers and disappearing out the front door, her emerald dress a streak of color vanishing into the night. She left her glass of champagne, her half-eaten meal, and her entire fantasy life behind on the table. Jonathan was now truly alone. He stood, a pariah at his own party, clutching the multi-million-dollar ring that had become a symbol of his ruin. He turned his fury back to Catherine. "You think you can just waltz in here and ruin me? I am the CEO of Reyes Jewels. I have contracts. I have a board." "About that," Catherine interrupted smoothly. "As the majority shareholder, holding 75% of the voting stock, which I inherited directly from my father, and which our prenuptial agreement, which you called a mere formality, keeps securely in my name. I have the authority to call an emergency session of the board. In fact, I did so an hour ago, via a secure video conference." Sam held up her tablet again. This time, it showed the faces of the 4 other board members in a live video call, each looking grim and resolute. "They've all seen the preliminary evidence of your financial malfeasance, Jonathan," Catherine continued, her tone chillingly professional. "They've seen the unauthorized transfer logs. They've also been made aware of the blatant misuse of company assets for personal gain, which constitutes a severe breach of your fiduciary duty and your employment contract. As of 5 minutes ago, the board voted unanimously. Your position as CEO of Reyes Jewels is terminated, effective immediately. Your corporate accounts have been frozen. The security codes to your office have been changed. The locks on our home will be changed within the hour." 2 large, imposing men in dark suits who had entered the restaurant discreetly a few moments earlier now stepped forward. They were not restaurant security. They had the hard, professional look of a private corporate security detail. Sam had summoned them. "These gentlemen will escort you off the premises," Catherine said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Your personal effects from the office will be couriered to a location of your choosing. You are no longer welcome in any Reyes Jewels establishment. You are no longer welcome in my life." One of the security men gently but firmly took the velvet box from Jonathan's nerveless grasp and handed it to Catherine. She accepted it without a word. Jonathan stared at her, his mouth agape. He was defeated. He had no moves left to make. The empire he had boasted of building had cast him out. The woman he had dismissed as a fragile artist had checkmated him in public. He was nothing. As the security guards flanked him and began to lead him towards the exit, he shot one last, venomous look at Catherine. "You'll be nothing without me. You'll run it into the ground." Catherine simply watched him go, her expression serene. The crowd parted as the disgraced CEO was escorted out like a common criminal. When the door swung shut behind him, a collective breath was released. The performance was over. Catherine stood for a moment, the velvet box in her hand. Then she turned to the stunned room. She looked directly at Mr. Bartholomew, who raised his wine glass in a silent, respectful toast. Catherine gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then she addressed the room. "My apologies for the interruption," she said, her voice calm and strong. "Please enjoy your evening. And don't forget to give generously to the Gems of the City Fund. The arts are a worthy investment." With that, she turned, and with Sam at her side, she walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind the wreckage of her old life to step into the dawn of her new one. 6 months later, the air in the Reyes Jewels flagship store on Fifth Avenue was electric. The scandal at La Lanterne d'Or had become the stuff of New York legend, a tale of corporate intrigue and personal justice that had paradoxically been the best publicity the brand could have ever hoped for. The story wasn't just about a cheating husband. It was about the quiet, brilliant woman who had reclaimed her throne. Catherine Reyes was no longer the reclusive artist behind the brand. She was its fierce, celebrated heart. The store was packed for the unveiling of her newest collection, the Phoenix. It was her first solo collection as both Chief Creative Officer and CEO, and the industry was watching with bated breath. They were not disappointed. The pieces were bold, innovative, and deeply personal. They spoke of fire, of rebirth, of strength forged in adversity. Critics raved, calling it her masterwork. Sales had skyrocketed. Catherine had not just saved her company from her husband. She had made it more successful than ever. Jonathan Davenport had faded into obscurity. Mired in lawsuits and facing federal fraud charges, he had become a social and professional pariah. His name was a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Penelope Vance had reportedly moved back to Ohio, her New York ambitions reduced to ash. In her private workshop, the one place that had always been her sanctuary, Catherine stood before her workbench. The chaos of the past few months had settled, and she was left with a profound sense of peace and purpose. Sam came in, holding 2 flutes of champagne. "To the Phoenix," Sam said, handing Catherine a glass. "We've already sold out of the centerpiece necklace. A Saudi princess bought it over the phone." Catherine smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "To the Phoenix," she echoed, clinking her glass against Sam's. "And to good friends who bring you champagne and help you stage corporate coups." They both laughed, a warm, easy sound. After Sam left, Catherine turned her attention to a velvet tray on her bench. On it lay the Star of Serenity. For months, she hadn't been able to look at it. It was a monument to her pain, a symbol of the deepest betrayal. She had considered selling it, breaking it down, locking it away forever. But that would be letting Jonathan win. It would mean he had succeeded in tainting it. Her father had taught her that every stone has a story. This stone's story had taken a dark turn, but she was the author, and she could write a new chapter. With the careful, practiced hands of a master, she began to work. She removed the magnificent blue diamond from its setting, the platinum band, the one meant to symbolize their intertwined lives, she placed into a crucible. She turned up the flame of her torch and watched as the metal that represented 19 years of lies softened, glowed, and melted into a formless, liquid silver pool. It was a catharsis. She spent the next few weeks redesigning. She took the 19 smaller diamonds, the ones that had marked each year of their marriage, and set them into a new piece. A magnificent brooch in the shape of a rising phoenix, its wings spread wide. It was a gift for Sam, a thank you for her unwavering loyalty. The Star of Serenity diamond itself she set into a new, singular piece. Not a ring to be given by a man, but a pendant. The design was simple, powerful, and utterly modern. The diamond was now the heart of a stylized star, its platinum points sharp and clean. It was no longer a symbol of a partnership, but a declaration of a single, brilliant entity. It was a symbol of her own light, her own resilience. It was no longer the Star of Serenity. She renamed it the Polaris, the North Star, constant, true, and a guide for one's own journey. She clasped the finished pendant around her own neck. It lay cool against her skin. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, not at a woman who had survived, but at a woman who had triumphed. The pain was a part of her story, a facet that had been cut into her, but it no longer defined her. It had simply added to her brilliance. Her legacy was not just her father's, and it was certainly not Jonathan's. It was hers, reclaimed and reforged in fire. And as the blue diamond on her chest caught the light, it sparkled with the promise of a future that was entirely and beautifully her own. A year had passed since the night at La Lanterne d'Or, a year of rebuilding, not just a company, but a life. The penthouse, once a monument to a shared and hollow success, was now entirely Catherine's. She had stripped it of Jonathan's heavy, masculine aesthetic, replacing dark woods and somber leathers with clean lines, soft textures, and an abundance of light. It was no longer a showroom, but a home, filled with art that inspired her, and silence that comforted her. One cool autumn evening, As a gentle rain whispered against the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, Catherine was reviewing the preliminary sketches for the next spring collection. The Polaris pendant, her personal emblem of victory, lay against her silk blouse, a familiar, cool weight. Her work was her joy now, unburdened by the need to please or accommodate anyone but her own creative vision. The company was stronger than ever, its narrative of authenticity and female strength resonating with a new generation of clients. The intercom buzzed, a harsh intrusion into the tranquility. She frowned, not expecting anyone. It was Wesley, the stern but protective doorman who had worked in the building for 2 decades. "Mrs. Reyes," his voice was strained, apologetic. "I am so sorry to disturb you. There is a man here, a Mr. Davenport. He is asking to see you. I told him you are not accepting visitors, but he is insistent." Catherine's blood ran cold for a single, fleeting moment. Jonathan. The name felt alien, a relic from a past life. She hadn't seen or heard from him since his unceremonious exit from the restaurant. His lawyers had communicated with hers, a sterile and bitter exchange that had finalized their divorce and settled the criminal charges with a plea deal that involved hefty fines and a permanent ban from the financial industry. He had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist in her world. "Wesley, you know my instructions," she said, her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am, I do. But he says it is a matter of life and death. He looks unwell, Mrs. Reyes. I would not have called otherwise." A part of her, the logical, self-protective part championed by Sam, screamed to refuse, to have Wesley call security and have him removed. But another, deeper part of her felt a strange sense of obligation, not to him, but to the woman she was now. A queen does not hide from ghosts. She faces them, and by facing them, banishes them from her kingdom for good. This was the final piece of unfinished business. "It's all right, Wesley," she said, her decision made. "Send him up." A few minutes later, the chime of the private elevator announced his arrival. Catherine stood in the center of her living room, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. When the doors slid open, the man who stepped out was a grotesque caricature of the Jonathan she had known. The impeccable Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled, ill-fitting blazer. His face was gaunt, his skin had a pasty, unhealthy pallor, and the confident gleam in his eyes had been replaced by a haunted, desperate flicker. He was a man hollowed out from the inside, the architecture of his arrogance having collapsed, leaving only a ruin. He stopped, taking in the transformed apartment. "You've changed the place," he murmured, his voice raspy. "I have," Catherine replied, her tone neutral. "What do you want, Jonathan?" He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes pleading. "Catherine, I know I have no right to be here. I know I am the last person on earth you want to see." He wrung his hands, a nervous, pathetic gesture. "But I had to see you. To tell you I am sorry." Catherine remained silent, her expression unchanging. She had learned that a man like Jonathan only ever used the word sorry as a key to unlock a door he wanted to walk through. He seemed to take her silence as an invitation to continue. "I was a fool, Cat, a blind, arrogant fool. I had everything. We had everything. I let my ego, this chase for more, I let it poison me. And that woman, Penelope, she was nothing. A symptom of the disease, not the cause. A mistake. A terrible, meaningless mistake." He was trying to weave a narrative of a good man who had lost his way, hoping to appeal to a well of sympathy he assumed must still exist. He had always underestimated her. "I'm ruined, Catherine," he said, his voice cracking. "My reputation, my career, it's all gone. I have nothing. I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that I know what I lost. I lost you." Catherine finally spoke, her voice as calm and clear as the rain against the window. "What you lost, Jonathan, was a source of income. You lost a brand you could take credit for. You lost a wife who was convenient and quiet. You never had me. Not really. Because to have someone, you have to see them. And you never saw me. You saw a name, a legacy, an asset. You saw a walking, talking vault of intellectual property you could exploit." He flinched as if she had slapped him. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" she countered, taking a small step forward. "Your apology isn't about the pain you caused me. It's about the consequences you are suffering. You're not sorry for the betrayal. You're sorry you got caught. You're not here for my forgiveness. You're here for some kind of absolution so you can sleep at night. Or perhaps you're here for a handout." His desperate eyes gave him away. That was the core of it. He was broken, and he had come back to the person he had broken, hoping she had a spare part for him. "I don't hate you, Jonathan," she said, and the words surprised him. They surprised her a little, too. Hate requires passion. It requires energy. And you are no longer worth my energy. When I look at you, I don't feel anger. I feel a profound pity. You had a seat at a banquet, and you chose to steal the silverware instead. You'll never understand what you truly threw away. She walked to the door of the apartment and held it open, a clear, final gesture. He looked at her, at the magnificent apartment, at the glittering city beyond the windows, a world he was no longer a part of. He saw the Polaris pendant at her throat, a stone he had tried to steal, now worn as her personal badge of honor. He saw a woman he had never known, a woman forged into steel in the fire he had set. Defeated, he shuffled past her without another word and stepped back into the elevator. Catherine watched as the doors slid shut, sealing him away. She closed the door to her home, the click of the latch echoing in the quiet room. It was the sound of the final sentence, of the final chapter of a long and painful book. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel sad. She felt light. The last echo of the lie was gone. The ghost was banished. She walked back to the window, looking down at the endless tapestry of lights that was New York City. It was her city, her business, her life. And for the first time, with no shadows of the past lurking at her door, it was entirely and completely hers to command. That night at the restaurant wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the birth of an icon. Catherine Reyes reminded us that a person's true worth is never defined by someone else's betrayal. It's defined by how they rise from the ashes. Jonathan thought he was taking everything from her, but he only succeeded in giving her back the one thing he had stolen over the years, her own power. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that sometimes the most devastating moments of our lives are just setting the stage for our greatest comeback. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate power move? Could you have been as calm and calculated as she was? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will leave you breathless. Thank you for listening. The air in the grand ballroom of the Lincoln Center crackled not with celebration, but with the electric hum of impending scandal. Tonight, the prestigious Vanguard Prize for Innovation was to be awarded, and everyone knew the recipient. Gideon Blackwood, the titan behind Ethelred Dynamics. But as the flashbulbs of the paparazzi painted the red carpet in strobes of merciless light, it wasn't Gideon's genius that held the city captive. It was his audacity. On his arm was not his wife of 20 years, the elegant and enigmatic Helena Blackwood, but a vapid starlet named Cassandra Monroe, draped in crimson silk. This wasn't just an affair, it was a public execution of a marriage, a flaunting of betrayal on the world's stage. But in the hallowed halls of high society, secrets have a way of seeking the light, and tonight, the judges of the Vanguard Prize had a secret of their own. They had conducted their due diligence, and what they found was a story far more explosive than mere infidelity. They had found the truth. The penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a museum of a life that was technically perfect, but emotionally sterile. It was a sprawling expanse of glass, chrome, and cold marble, overlooking Central Park like a silent, indifferent god. From this vantage point, 70 stories above the fray, Helena Blackwood could watch the city breathe, a constellation of ambitions and heartbreaks laid out at her feet. For 2 decades, she had been the silent partner in the meteoric rise of her husband, Gideon Blackwood. She was the architect. He was the monument. Their morning routine was a testament to their emotional distance, a carefully choreographed ballet of avoidance. Gideon would rise at 5 a.m., his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space as he headed to his personal gym. He was a man obsessed with his own image, the chiseled jaw, the custom-tailored Brioni suits, the carefully curated narrative of a self-made genius. He devoured headlines about himself the way other men devoured breakfast, his ego fed by the fawning prose of business journals. Helena, on the other hand, would wake with the sun, slipping into her study, a room Gideon hadn't entered in years. It was her sanctuary, lined with books on market theory, quantum computing, and economic history. While Gideon was sculpting his body, Helena was sculpting the future of his company. It was she who had analyzed the initial schematics for their proprietary AI algorithm, she who had devised the aggressive but brilliant market penetration strategy, and she who had, with the prescience of a financial oracle, hedged their investments just before the 2018 tech bubble correction, saving them from ruin. She did it all from the shadows, a ghost in the machine of their success. The world saw Gideon Blackwood, the visionary. They never saw Helena, the woman who drew the blueprints for his visions. This morning, the air was thicker than usual with unspoken words. The Vanguard Prize ceremony was that evening. It was the culmination of Gideon's life's work, the ultimate validation he so desperately craved. The Wall Street Journal and Forbes had all but declared him the winner. Gideon strode into the kitchen, already dressed, radiating a restless energy. He didn't look at Helena, instead focusing on the espresso machine as it hissed to life. "My driver is coming at 6, he announced, his voice bouncing off the marble countertops. "The red carpet interviews start at 6:30 sharp. Don't be late." Helena looked up from her tablet, where she was tracking anomalous trading patterns in the Asian markets. Her expression was placid, a calm sea over a turbulent depth. "I wasn't aware I was invited to the red carpet." He finally turned to her, a flicker of annoyance in his steel-grey eyes. "Of course you are. It's expected. Wear the blue gown, the one from the Rothschild gala. It's appropriate." Subdued, he meant. He wanted her to be a prop, a quiet, smiling accessory that validated the image of the stable family man behind the corporate warrior. "I see," she said, her voice even. "And what will Miss Monroe be wearing?" The question hung in the air, sharp and glittering as a shard of glass. Gideon's jaw tightened. He had been seeing Cassandra Monroe, an actress whose fame was inversely proportional to her talent, for 6 months. He hadn't even bothered to be discreet. He seemed to relish the flagrancy of it, as if proving he was a man who could have anything, and anyone, he wanted. "That's none of your concern," he snapped, his voice low and menacing. "This is the most important night of my career, Helena. Do not make a scene." "I have never made a scene, Gideon," she replied, her gaze unwavering. It was true. For 20 years, she had absorbed his narcissism, his neglect, and his casual cruelties with a stoicism that was often mistaken for weakness. But patience, she knew, was not an infinite resource. It was a dam, and behind it, a reservoir of resolve had been quietly rising for years. Just be there. Smile for the cameras. Play the part you've always played, he commanded, before downing his espresso in one gulp and striding out, the click of his Italian leather shoes the only farewell. Helena sat alone in the echoing silence. Play the part? The devoted wife, the supportive spouse. For years, that role had been her cover, allowing her to work unnoticed, to steer their shared ship through treacherous waters without the interference of his colossal ego. But tonight, he wasn't just asking her to play a part. He was asking her to be a willing spectator at her own humiliation. She closed her tablet and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below was a whirlwind of activity, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the sky. She thought back to the beginning, to a time before the marble and the glass, before the name Blackwood was synonymous with power. She remembered a small apartment in Brooklyn, filled with takeout boxes and ambitious dreams. And she remembered a promise, a pact made in the hopeful darkness of their youth. A promise Gideon had long since forgotten, but one that was codified, documented, and lying dormant like a sleeping dragon in a secure vault downtown. A small, resolute smile touched her lips for the first time that day. Gideon wanted her to play a part. Oh, she would play a part. But it wouldn't be the one he had written for her. The script was about to change, and she was the only one who knew the ending. The year was 2005. Gideon Blackwood was not a titan. He was a bartender with a computer science degree from a state college and a burning, unfocused ambition. He had ideas, a dozen a day, but they were like sparks from a firework, brilliant for a second and then gone, lacking the substance to catch light. He had charisma in spades, a magnetic quality that drew people in, but he lacked discipline and, more importantly, capital. Helena Rothschild was the opposite. She was a librarian's daughter from Queens who had devoured books on finance and economics since she was a teenager. She had won a scholarship to Columbia, where she graduated summa cum laude, with a dual degree in economics and mathematics. She saw the world not as a stage, but as a complex system of interconnected patterns and probabilities. She was quiet, observant, and possessed a mind that could see the matrix behind the reality. They met at a dreary networking event for aspiring entrepreneurs. Gideon was holding court, painting a grand vision of a future he couldn't afford to build. Helena was in the corner, listening, her analytical mind dissecting his pitch, separating the bluster from the one kernel of genuine brilliance within it, a nascent idea for predictive data analysis. After he was done, she approached him. "Your monetization strategy is flawed," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're focusing on consumer-facing applications. The real money is in enterprise-level security and logistics." Gideon, accustomed to adoration, was taken aback by her directness. He tried to dismiss her, but she countered every one of his arguments with data, with market projections, with a quiet confidence that was more compelling than all his boisterous charm. They talked for 3 hours. By the end of the night, Gideon realized he had found something far more valuable than an investor. He had found a compass. At the time, Helena had just received a small inheritance from her grandmother. It was $75,000, her family's entire life savings. To anyone else, it was a down payment on a house or a safety net. To Helena, it was seed capital. For weeks, she didn't just give it to Gideon, she directed it. She spent her days in the university library, poring over obscure technical journals and patent filings. She identified a small, failing hardware company in Palo Alto that held a key patent for microprocessing that would be essential for Gideon's algorithm to work at scale. "We don't buy the company," she told him, spreading documents across the floor of their tiny apartment. "We buy the debt. We get a controlling interest for pennies on the dollar and absorb the intellectual property." It was a ruthless, brilliant move that Gideon would later claim as his own. Before she invested a single dollar, she drew up a contract. She wasn't naive. She understood Gideon's nature. He was a rocket, but a rocket needed a guidance system. The document was a private partnership agreement. It stipulated that while Gideon would be the CEO and public face of their new venture, to be called Ethelred Dynamics, the initial seed capital and all intellectual property derived from it were owned by a holding company. That holding company was named HRB Ventures. H for Helena, R for Rothschild, B for Blackwood. She was the sole signatory. Gideon, eager to get his hands on the money, barely glanced at the fine print before signing. He saw it as a formality, a piece of paper that would be buried under the mountain of success they were about to build. He never spoke of it again. The early years were a blur of hard work. Gideon was the salesman, the evangelist, charming venture capitalists and poaching talent. Helena was the strategist, the architect, working 18-hour days from a back office. She built their financial models, wrote the core of their first business plan, and personally managed their portfolio, making a series of daring but calculated investments in adjacent technologies that paid off spectacularly. She created the very foundation upon which Gideon built his throne. As the company grew, so did the distance between them. Gideon became addicted to the spotlight. The story of the self-made tech genius from humble beginnings was intoxicating, and he began to believe it himself. Helena's contributions were gradually erased from the corporate mythology. She was relegated to the role of the supportive wife. At board meetings, if she offered an opinion, Gideon would cut her off with a condescending, "My wife doesn't concern herself with the day-to-day." The board members, all men he had personally courted, would chuckle politely. Helena let it happen. It was, at first, a strategic retreat. His ego was a useful tool. Pointed in the right direction, it could move mountains. She convinced herself that the success of the company was all that mattered. The credit was irrelevant. But over time, the private erasure became a public humiliation. He started correcting her in public, belittling her opinions on art, on politics, on wine. He was rewriting their personal history as well as their professional one, casting her as a simple woman he had plucked from obscurity. The affair with Cassandra Munro was not the cause of the fracture. It was merely the final, unbearable symptom of a disease that had been rotting their partnership from the inside out for years. It was the ultimate expression of his contempt, a declaration that she was not only irrelevant to his success, but also disposable in his life. As she stood in her walk-in closet that evening, the blue gown Gideon had commanded her to wear hanging like a shroud, she thought of that original contract locked away in a bank vault. For 20 years it had been her silent, secret insurance policy. She had never intended to use it. She had hoped, even in the darkest moments, that the man she had once believed in was still in there somewhere. But he was gone. In his place was a hollow monument to his own ego. And a monument, she knew, could be toppled. She pushed the blue gown aside and reached for another. It was a dress of shimmering silver, elegantly cut, bold but not ostentatious. It was a dress that did not blend in. It was the armor of a queen about to retake her kingdom. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, not as Helena Blackwood, the billionaire's wife, but as Helena Rothschild, the founder of HRB Ventures. The shadow partner was about to step into the light. The Lincoln Center was a maelstrom of light and sound. A river of black limousines flowed to the curb, depositing New York's elite onto a red carpet that snaked towards the grand entrance like a plush, velvet tongue. The air was electric with the snapping of camera shutters and the shouted questions of entertainment reporters. It was the kind of manufactured glamour that Gideon Blackwood now considered his natural habitat. He arrived precisely at 6:45 p.m., stepping out of his custom Maybach, but the gasp that rippled through the press corps was not for him. It was for the woman who emerged after him. Cassandra Munro was poured into a strapless crimson gown so tight it seemed painted on. A diamond necklace, a gift from Gideon that was worth more than a suburban home, glittered at her throat. She was a blaze of calculated audacity, a scarlet letter worn as a badge of honor. Gideon beamed, wrapping a possessive arm around her waist. He posed for the cameras, his smile wide and triumphant. He was making a statement. This was his night, his victory, and this was the woman he chose to share it with. He was not just accepting an award, he was unveiling his new life. The reporters, smelling blood in the water, went into a frenzy. "Gideon, over here. Where's Helena tonight?" "Mr. Blackwood, is this your official announcement?" "Cassandra, are you the new Mrs. Blackwood?" Gideon simply laughed, a deep, booming sound that was broadcast across a dozen networks. He leaned into a microphone. "Tonight is about the future," he declared, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "And the future is brighter than ever." It was a perfectly crafted soundbite, ambiguous enough to be deniable, but pointed enough to be unmistakable. He was discarding his wife in front of the entire world. 10 minutes later, a simple black town car pulled up, unheralded, a few yards down from the main scrum. The door opened, and Helena Blackwood stepped out. There was no fanfare. Most of the photographers, blinded by the spectacle of Gideon and Cassandra, didn't even notice her at first. She was wearing the silver gown. It caught the ambient light, creating a subtle, liquid shimmer that was the antithesis of Cassandra's garish red. Her only jewelry was a pair of simple diamond stud earrings and her original wedding band, a plain gold ring that Gideon had long since replaced with a diamond-encrusted monstrosity. Her hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and her face was a mask of serene composure. She didn't look like a victim. She looked regal. A few veteran journalists, the ones who looked for the real story beyond the manufactured drama, turned their lenses toward her. One of them, a seasoned reporter from the New York Times named Michael Chen, lowered his camera and approached her cautiously. "Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, his voice respectful. "A surprise to see you arriving separately." Helena offered him a small, enigmatic smile. "My husband is fond of grand entrances. I prefer to simply arrive." Her calm was disarming. There was no trace of the jilted wife, no hint of tears or anger. Chen was intrigued. "Your husband seems to be celebrating more than just the award tonight." "Gideon has always been a man of grand appetites," she replied, her choice of words precise. "But the Vanguard Prize isn't about appetite. It's about substance. I have great faith the committee will honor that distinction." With a polite nod, she moved past him and walked toward the entrance. She didn't rush. Her pace was deliberate, her posture perfect. As she walked, a murmur began to spread through the crowd. People who had been gawking at Gideon and his mistress now turned to watch her. They saw the blood-red dress of the other woman and the quiet, luminous silver of the wife. They saw Gideon's loud, preening arrogance and Helena's silent, unshakable dignity. The narrative he had so carefully crafted, that of a powerful man upgrading to a newer model, began to falter. A new narrative was taking shape, whispered from person to person. It was a story of defiance, of grace under fire. By the time Helena reached the doors of the Lincoln Center, the sea of reporters parted for her with the respect they had not shown her husband. The flashbulbs followed her, no longer capturing a victim, but documenting a mystery. Gideon, who had been preening for a live television interview, saw her entrance on a nearby monitor. A flash of pure fury crossed his face, so quick that the camera almost missed it. He had expected her to arrive cowed, defeated, perhaps even to not show up at all. He had not expected this quiet power, this refusal to be erased. She had stolen his moment, not by making a scene, but by being the absolute antithesis of one. He abruptly cut the interview short, and grabbing Cassandra's arm a little too tightly, strode into the ballroom, his triumphant mood curdling into a cold, simmering rage. The game was not playing out as he had intended. His public execution had turned into her silent coronation, and the main event had not even begun. The grand ballroom was a universe of its own, a galaxy of glittering chandeliers, clinking champagne flutes, and the low, constant hum of power. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the murmur of 1,000 conversations. Here, deals were made, alliances were forged, and reputations were cemented or shattered with a well-placed whisper. Gideon and Cassandra held court near the main stage, a magnetic pole of scandal and celebrity. A circle of sycophants and curiosity-seekers surrounded them. Gideon was in his element, regaling the crowd with anecdotes of his own brilliance, while Cassandra laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, clinging to his arm as if it were a life raft. She was an object of fascination, scorn, and envy. Every woman in the room was watching her, and every man was watching Gideon, wondering at the sheer audacity of the man. Helena entered the ballroom and paused, taking in the scene. She did not head towards her husband. Instead, she moved with quiet purpose along the periphery, a silver ghost navigating a sea of black tuxedos and jewel-toned gowns. She exchanged polite greetings, her smile warm but her eyes observant. She was not there to socialize. She was there to watch. Her presence did not go unnoticed. A palpable shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. Conversations would dip as she passed, and heads would turn. The whispers followed her, a rustling tide of speculation. They were watching a drama unfold in real time, a high-stakes play with no script. Jonathan Finch, a silver-haired, shrewd-looking man, and the longest-serving member of Ethelred's board of directors, broke away from a group of bankers and made his way to her side. Finch was old money and old school. He valued results over rhetoric, and had always been quietly skeptical of Gideon's self-aggrandizing mythology. "Helena," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You look magnificent." "Thank you, Jonathan," she replied, accepting a glass of water from a passing waiter. "That was quite an entrance," he noted, his eyes twinkling with something that looked like approval. Or rather, an arrival. "I'm told this is a night for celebrating the future," Helena said, echoing Gideon's words from the red carpet with a delicate, ironic twist. Finch grunted. "The future has a way of being built on the foundations of the past. Some people tend to forget that." He glanced across the room at Gideon, who was now posing for a selfie with Cassandra and a young tech blogger. Finch's expression was one of mild distaste. Some of us on the board have not forgotten who structured the initial debt-leveraged IP acquisition that became the bedrock of this company. It was a move worthy of a Rockefeller. It was the closest he had ever come to openly acknowledging her role. Helena met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. He knew. Perhaps he hadn't known the full extent of it, but he knew enough. He was an ally she hadn't realized she had. "Foundations are important, Jonathan," she said softly. "If they're weak, everything built on top of them eventually crumbles." As Finch nodded in agreement, Gideon finally spotted her. His face, which had been a mask of jovial bonhomie, hardened into a granite slab of fury. Excusing himself from his fawning circle, he strode across the ballroom, his path clearing before him. He grabbed Helena's arm, his fingers digging into her skin, and steered her toward a secluded alcove hidden behind a large floral arrangement. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. The charming public facade was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of his narcissism. Helena did not flinch. She slowly and deliberately removed his hand from her arm. "I am attending an award ceremony. I believe I am still your wife, and this is my company as well." "Your company?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You are nothing but a name on a tax form. You haven't contributed anything of value in a decade. You sit in your study playing with numbers while I build an empire." "Every brick of your empire," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "was laid on a foundation that I designed and that I paid for. You seem to have forgotten that." "That was a lifetime ago," he spat. "A small loan. I've paid you back 1,000 times over with this life." He gestured vaguely at the opulent ballroom. "I made you Mrs. Gideon Blackwood. Don't you forget that. Now you will go home. Make up an excuse. A headache, a sick relative, I don't care. You will not stay and ruin my night." Helena looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she felt nothing. Not love, not anger, not even pity. Just a vast, cold emptiness where her feelings for him used to be. He had completely erased her from their history, from his mind. He truly believed his own lies. "No, Gideon," she said simply. "What did you say?" "I said no. I will be staying. I want to see you get your award. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Her smile was razor thin. "You should get back to your guest. Miss Monroe looks lonely." She turned and walked out of the alcove, leaving him standing there, his face a mask of thunderous disbelief. He was used to her acquiescence, her silent endurance. This quiet, unyielding defiance was a language he didn't understand, and it terrified him. He watched her rejoin the party, moving with an unnerving grace, a silver queen gliding through a court of whispers. The balance of power had shifted, and he could feel the ground beneath his feet beginning to crack. As dessert plates were cleared, and the lights in the grand ballroom dimmed, a hush fell over the assembly. The moment had arrived. The master of ceremonies, a famous talk show host, walked to the podium and delivered a glowing 10-minute introduction filled with superlatives about innovation, disruption, and the singular vision of the modern pioneer. Every word was a gilded arrow pointing directly at Gideon Blackwood. Gideon sat at his front row table, soaking it in. Cassandra had her hand, placed possessively on his thigh, her eyes wide with adoration. He had already prepared his acceptance speech. It was resting in the inner pocket of his tuxedo. It was a masterpiece of feigned humility, speaking of long nights, impossible odds, and the relentless spirit of entrepreneurship. It did not mention Helena once. Finally, the host concluded, "And now, to present the 2025 Vanguard Prize for Innovation and Philanthropy, please welcome the esteemed chairwoman of the Vanguard Foundation, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Dr. Evelyn Reed was a legend. A former physicist and university president, she was a woman in her late 70s, with piercing blue eyes and an air of intellectual authority that could make billionaires feel like graduate students. She commanded absolute respect. When she took the stage, the applause was thunderous and genuine. She adjusted the microphone, her gaze sweeping across the expectant faces in the crowd. "Good evening," she began, her voice crisp and clear. "The Vanguard Prize is not merely a celebration of success. There are many ways to measure success: stock valuations, market share, media mentions." Her eyes seemed to flicker for a moment towards Gideon's table. "But we, the trustees of this foundation, believe in a more fundamental metric: impact. True, lasting impact. The kind of impact that is not always visible on a balance sheet." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Innovation is often portrayed as a lightning strike, a singular moment of genius from a lone visionary. This is a romantic and deeply misleading myth. Innovation is not a moment. It is a process. It is a chain of events, often beginning in obscurity. It begins with a spark of an idea, yes, but that spark requires fuel. It requires capital, not just money, but intelligent, daring, and often unacknowledged foundational investment." Gideon shifted in his seat, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. He wanted the fanfare, the announcement of his name. This academic lecture was delaying his coronation. Dr. Reed continued, her voice gaining intensity. "In our deliberations for this year's prize, the committee undertook its most rigorous due diligence process to date. We don't just look at the last quarter's earnings report. We look at the entire life cycle of an enterprise. We go back to the beginning, to the seed. Because the nature of the seed determines the nature of the tree." The ballroom was silent, captivated by her words. Helena sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her breathing slow and even. She knew what was coming. "This year, we examined Ethelred Dynamics," Dr. Reed announced. The cameras all swung to find Gideon, who preened, a modest smile playing on his lips as he prepared to stand. "We saw a corporate titan, a leader in its field, a testament to bold leadership and aggressive growth. The public face of this company is, of course, its CEO, Gideon Blackwood." A polite smattering of applause broke out. Gideon gave a slight, magnanimous nod. "But our investigation did not end there," Dr. Reed said, holding up a hand to quiet the room. "We delved into the articles of incorporation. We unsealed the records of the initial seed funding. We were searching for the first mover, the prime catalyst, and we found it. We discovered that the initial, high-risk capital, the $75,000 that acquired the key patents and funded the first year of operations, did not come from a venture capital firm, nor from Mr. Blackwood's personal finances." Gideon's smile froze on his face. A cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. What was she talking about? "That foundational investment," Dr. Reed declared, her voice ringing with authority, "came from a privately established holding company, registered in the state of Delaware in 2005. A holding company that, according to the original partnership agreement, retained a majority stake in the foundational intellectual property of Ethelred Dynamics. The name of that entity was HRB Ventures." The name meant nothing to the audience, but to Gideon it was a thunderclap. His mind raced back 20 years to a flimsy piece of paper he had signed without a second thought. A formality. He could barely breathe. His face, which had been tanned and glowing, was rapidly turning a pale, ashen grey. Dr. Reed looked out over the stunned crowd, her gaze finally landing, with deliberate precision, on Helena. "The Vanguard Prize is awarded for the single most pivotal act of innovation, the act that makes all other acts possible. The committee has decided that the true innovation behind Ethelred Dynamics was not the final product, but the initial, visionary investment strategy, the foundation on which everything was built. She took a deep breath, her voice resonating with the weight of her final words. Therefore, the 2025 Vanguard Prize for Innovation and Philanthropy is not awarded to a person, but to the entity that represents that foundational act. We honor HRB Ventures and its sole proprietor and founder. She paused for a beat, letting the entire world hang on her next words. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating this year's laureate, Mrs. Helena Rothschild Blackwood. The silence that followed Dr. Reed's announcement was not a silence of respect, but of collective, cataclysmic shock. It was a physical vacuum, sucking the air and sound out of the grand ballroom. For a full 5 seconds, 1,000 people were frozen, their brains struggling to process what they had just heard. Then, the explosion. A disbelieving murmur erupted into a roar of conversation. Cameras, which had been trained on Gideon, swiveled with a mechanical whir, hunting for their new subject. The spotlight operator, momentarily confused, swung the beam wildly before finding her, a serene island of silver in a turbulent sea of black and white. Helena didn't move. She simply inclined her head in a gesture of acknowledgement towards Dr. Reed on the stage. Gideon was a statue of horror. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, sickly pallor. His mouth was slightly agape, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and pure, unadulterated fury. He looked at Helena, his gaze a silent scream of betrayal. How? Beside him, Cassandra Monroe was a picture of utter bewilderment. Her perfectly painted smile had dissolved. She looked from Gideon's ashen face to the radiant woman in silver, and for the first time, a glimmer of understanding and fear entered her eyes. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star. The power, the money, the prestige she had so coveted did not belong to the man beside her. It had belonged to his wife all along. On stage, Dr. Reed smiled warmly. "Mrs. Blackwood, will you join us?" Slowly, gracefully, Helena rose from her chair. The whispers died down as she began to walk, replaced by the frenetic, syncopated clicking of 100 cameras. Her every step was measured, confident. This was not a walk of surprise, it was a walk of arrival. She had been preparing for this moment for 20 years. As she passed Gideon's table, she didn't look at him. She didn't need to. His humiliation was a palpable force, radiating from him like heat. He was utterly broken, exposed as a fraud on the grandest stage he could have imagined. The monument had crumbled, revealing the empty space where a foundation should have been. She ascended the small set of stairs to the stage and shook Dr. Reed's hand. The older woman grasped her hand with both of hers, a gesture of profound respect and solidarity. Dr. Reed then presented her with the award, a heavy, sculpted crystal obelisk symbolizing a shard of light. Helena stepped to the podium. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces, at the flashing lights, at the wreckage of her husband's ego. She had not prepared a speech. She didn't need one. "Thank you, Dr. Reed, and to the trustees of the Vanguard Foundation," she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. "You have given this award not for the destination, but for the first step of the journey, a step taken in faith and with hope a long time ago." She held the crystal obelisk in her hands, turning it slightly so it caught the light. "It is often said that behind every great man is a great woman," she continued, her voice devoid of any malice, stating it as a simple fact. "Perhaps it is time we amend that proverb. Sometimes The great woman is not behind the man. Sometimes she is the very ground beneath his feet, the ground he has forgotten he stands on. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room before, finally, and for the first time, landing on Gideon. Their eyes met across the gulf of the ballroom. In her gaze, there was no triumph. No, I told you so. There was only a quiet, final finality. A door closing. This award is not for me, she concluded. It is for every silent partner, every unseen architect, every woman who has been the ground beneath someone else's feet. May you all find your voice, and may you never, ever let anyone forget you are there. Thank you. She turned from the podium as the ballroom erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a tidal wave of sound, a roar of approval, of shock, of unadulterated admiration for the sheer, stunning elegance of her victory. Jonathan Finch was on his feet, clapping loudest of all. Other board members, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning realization, slowly rose to join him. The story was no longer about infidelity. It was about justice. It was about the epic, quiet unveiling of the truth. Gideon Blackwood sat paralyzed amidst the standing ovation, a forgotten man at his own coronation. The spotlight had finally found the true architect of Ethelred dynamics, and he was left alone in the darkness. The fallout was immediate and brutal. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan the next morning, the story was on the front page of every major newspaper and trending #1 globally on every social media platform. The Blackwood coup, the architect's revenge, the woman who built the man who betrayed her. The narratives were swift and merciless. Ethelred dynamics, stock opened in a freefall. The market, which runs on confidence and narrative, had lost faith in the visionary it had once celebrated. Gideon Blackwood, the charismatic genius, had been unmasked as a frontman, a charismatic shell. Panicked investors began to dump their shares, wiping out billions in market capitalization in a matter of hours. Gideon locked himself in his office, the one with the panoramic view of the city he thought he owned. He was a caged animal, pacing and shouting into his phone at his lawyers, his PR team, anyone who would listen. Fix this. Sue them. Sue the foundation. Sue her. His lead attorney, a stoic man named Mr. Davies, finally cut through the tirade. There is nothing to fix, Gideon, Davies said, his voice flat. We've reviewed the partnership agreement from 2005. It's ironclad. She doesn't just own the foundational IP. The agreement includes a majority clause triggered by gross reputational misconduct by the managing partner. By publicly flaunting your affair and bringing the company into disrepute, you triggered that clause. The board will be forced to act. The board works for me, Gideon roared. The board has a fiduciary duty to the shareholders, Davies corrected him coolly. And right now, the single greatest liability to the shareholders is you. Cassandra Munro was the first casualty. Her agent dropped her that morning. The producers of the small independent film she was meant to star in invoked a morality clause in her contract and fired her. By noon, she had packed her bags and vanished from the penthouse and from public life, a footnote in a much larger story. While Gideon's world imploded, Helena's was just beginning. She convened an emergency board meeting that afternoon. She didn't enter the room like a vengeful conqueror, but with the quiet authority of someone who had always belonged at the head of the table. Jonathan Finch sat to her right, a silent show of his unwavering support. She laid out her plan with calm, lucid precision. She wasn't there to liquidate or to punish. She was there to rebuild. Gideon's vision was about growth at all costs, she told the shaken board members. My vision is about sustainable, meaningful innovation. We will be restructuring the company from the top down. We will establish a new ethics committee. and we will be rebranding our philanthropic arm the Blackwood Foundation." She paused, letting them absorb the implications. "It will now be called the Rothschild Institute," she announced, "and its new mission will be to provide seed funding and mentorship to female entrepreneurs in science and technology. We will build a new generation of architects, and we will ensure their names are never erased." It was a masterstroke. She wasn't just taking over, she was redeeming the soul of the company. The board, seeing a path back to stability and good publicity, voted unanimously to install her as interim CEO. The official press release went out before the market closed. The stock immediately began to rally. Days later, Gideon was served with divorce papers and a court order barring him from the Ethelred headquarters. The settlement was swift and brutal, dictated entirely by the terms of the original agreement he had so carelessly signed. He was left with a fraction of his fortune, a man stripped of his power, his wife, and the myth he had built around himself. He became a recluse, his name a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and country clubs. Weeks after the ceremony, Helena stood alone in the CEO's office. Her office. She had redecorated, replacing the oversized portraits of Gideon and the ostentatious modern art with elegant, understated pieces. The room felt lighter, cleaner. She looked out the window at the same panoramic view, but she saw it differently now. It was not a kingdom to be ruled, but a city full of possibilities, full of other unseen architects waiting for their chance. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Dr. Evelyn Reed. "The first applications for the Rothschild grant are pouring in. You've started a revolution, my dear." A genuine smile, warm and full of promise, touched Helena's lips. She hadn't sought revenge, she had sought reclamation. She hadn't wanted to destroy an empire, but to reclaim her place as its rightful founder and steer it toward a better purpose. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down to forge the keys to a new kingdom, one built not on a lie, but on the unshakable foundation of the truth. The shadow partner had finally found her son. The storm of the Vanguard Prize had passed, leaving in its wake a changed landscape. The international media, having feasted on the drama, had moved on to the next scandal. Ethelred Dynamics, or as it was now officially known, Rothschild Analytics, had stabilized. The stock was climbing steadily, buoyed by the market's confidence in its new, no-nonsense leader. But for Helena, the true work had only just begun. Victory was an event, leadership was a process, and it was often a quiet, grueling one. The CEO's office, once a monument to Gideon's ego, was now a functional workspace. The gaudy, abstract sculptures were gone, replaced by framed patent schematics and early architectural drawings of historical buildings, a nod to her love of structure and design. The oversized desk, a slab of obsidian that Gideon had used as a throne, had been swapped for a collaborative round table. Power, she believed, should be circular, not hierarchical. Her days were a methodical dismantling of Gideon's legacy. She discovered his vanity projects, hidden in obscure sub-corporations, bleeding millions of dollars a quarter. The worst was Ethelred Aerospace, a harebrained scheme to launch a fleet of luxury commercial space drones. It was a project with no viable business model, fueled entirely by Gideon's desire to be compared to Elon Musk. Jonathan Finch sat across from her at the round table, a thick binder of financials open before him. "The aerospace division is a black hole," he stated, his face grim. "We've sunk nearly 200 million into it with no tangible results. Gideon's loyalists on the engineering board are fighting to keep it funded. They call it his magnum opus." "A magnum opus is a great work, Jonathan, not a great expense," Helena said, coolly, circling the division's budget in red ink. Gideon was selling a fantasy, We sell results. She looked at him, her gaze firm. Dissolve the division. Reassign the viable engineers to R&D, offer generous severance to the rest, and sell off the physical assets. We'll recoup what we can and reinvest it in our core AI logistics platform. Finch nodded, a look of relief on his face. It will be unpopular with the old guard. The old guard is welcome to retire, Helena replied without malice. This company is moving forward, not sideways. That evening, as she was clearing out the last of Gideon's personal effects from a little used credenza in the office, she found something that gave her pause. It was a worn leather sketchbook, dating back to their first year of marriage. She opened it carefully. Inside were not business plans or algorithms, but drawings. Sketches of bridges, of futuristic cityscapes, of a small, cozy house on a lake that they had once dreamed of building together. The lines were full of life, of a creative energy she hadn't seen in him for years. This was the Gideon she had first met, the bartender with a brilliant, untamed mind, before his ambition had curdled into narcissism. She traced a drawing of a complex, beautiful bridge, its design both elegant and strong. It was a reminder that the man she had defeated was not a monster in the beginning. He was a creator who had become so obsessed with the statue of himself that he had forgotten the joy of building. She felt a pang, not of regret, but of a deep, sorrowful nostalgia for a man and a marriage that no longer existed. She closed the book and placed it in her briefcase. It was a piece of her history, and she would not erase it, as he had tried to erase her. It would serve as a reminder of how easily vision can be corrupted by ego. The next day, she put that reminder into practice. Her assistant informed her that a junior data scientist had been trying to get a meeting for months to pitch a new project, but had been consistently blocked by Gideon's bureaucratic inner circle. Her name was Anya Sharma, and she was only 2 years out of MIT. Helena told her assistant to send her in immediately. Anya entered the office, looking terrified. She was young, barely 25, and clutched a tablet as if it were a shield. "Madam CEO, thank you for seeing me. I know you're busy." "The door is always open for good ideas, Miss Sharma," Helena said, gesturing for her to sit at the round table. "What do you have?" For the next 30 minutes, Anya, her initial nervousness melting away under Helena's focused attention, laid out a breathtakingly brilliant proposal. It was a new type of predictive algorithm for supply chain logistics, one that used quantum modeling to anticipate disruptions not just days, but weeks in advance, with a staggering degree of accuracy. It was revolutionary. "This is incredible," Helena said, studying the data on Anya's tablet. "Why was this not brought to my attention before?" Anya flushed. "Management said it was too theoretical, that our clients weren't asking for it. Mr. Blackwood preferred projects with more glamour, like luxury space drones." Helena looked at the young woman, seeing in her the same spark of passion and overlooked brilliance that she herself had possessed 20 years ago. This was the future of the company, not in flashy, ego-driven fantasies, but here, in the quiet, methodical genius of a young engineer. She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. "Glamour fades, Ms. Sharma. Efficiency is forever." She turned back to her. "I'm giving you a team and a budget. I want a working prototype in 6 months. You will report directly to me." Anya's eyes widened, filling with tears of disbelief and gratitude. "Thank you, Madam CEO, thank you. You won't regret this." "I know I won't," Helena said with a smile. After Anya left, Helena stayed by the window. The city lights were beginning to glitter in the dusk. Gideon had seen this view as a reflection of his own power. She saw it as a complex, interconnected system, a web of logistics and infrastructure of people and ideas, all moving in a delicate, intricate dance. It was not something to be conquered. It was something to be understood, to be improved, to be made better. She was not just the CEO. She was not just the woman who had won. She was the architect. And she was finally, after all these years, holding her own blueprints, ready to build something true. What an incredible story of quiet strength and ultimate justice. Helena's journey reminds us that the most powerful moves aren't always the loudest. For 20 years, she laid the foundation, not just for $1 billion company, but for the moment she would finally reclaim her own name and her own story. It's a powerful lesson in knowing your worth, even when the world refuses to see it. What do you think was her most powerful move? Was it her silence over the years, the creation of that ironclad contract, or the sheer, unshakable dignity she displayed on the night of the ceremony? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Stories like this, where truth and justice prevail, are what we love to share on this channel. If you were captivated by Helena's story and want to hear more tales of hidden histories and dramatic reckonings, please give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to share it with someone who would appreciate a story of true empowerment. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Thank you for listening.